My name's Patrick Freyne, and I'm going to read to you from my book of memoir essays. It's called "Okay, Let's Do Your Stupid Idea." Um, the first essay in the book is called "It's the Military Life for Me," and it's about growing up with an army man father and living in army barracks and things like that. So I'm going to read a few pages from that. When I was 12 years old, my army man father brought me on what I took to be a bonding father son camping trip in a stretch of the Wicklow Mountains. My mother drove us up to the edge of civilization, where we got out of the car and walked up a dirt track. Along the way, my father cut and carved two walking sticks out of blackthorn branches, and after a few hours of walking, we camped in the shade of a wood by what I can only describe as a babbling brook, because it was a brook and it babbled. It was idyllic, really. We ate army rations of sausages and beans from little foil tins heated over a campfire, and from time to time I spoke coordinates that my father called out to me into a little walkie-talkie. Around 20 years later, the family was waxing nostalgic about this over after-dinner drinks. Why did we have a walkie-talkie? I asked. It was a strange part of the memory that never quite made sense. Well, said my father, we needed to keep in touch with the rest of the men. The rest of the men, I said. I don't understand. You see, there were rumours of an IRA training camp in the mountains, and the Rangers had been asked to investigate, said my father. The Rangers, by the way, were a crack commando squad, and my dad was, at this time, their commanding officer. Right, I said. I figured the terrorists would have their eyes peeled for guards and soldiers, said my father. Sure, but if they saw a man and his son on a camping trip, they'd just think it was a father and son on a camping trip. I thought we were a father and son on a camping trip. Oh no, said my father. That was just a cover. A cover. Well, you were really my son, admitted my father. I'm glad to hear it, I said. But we weren't purely on a father and son camping trip. No, I said, a little bitterly. Apparently we were tracking terrorists. My father nodded happily. Was it not a bit dangerous? Asked my wife. What if you'd actually run into trouble? Oh, we were fine, said my father. I was armed. You had a gun, I said. Again, my father nodded happily. In a shoulder holster. What type of gun? Asked my wife, whose hippie parents wouldn't let her play with toy guns, and who will certainly, as a consequence, end up killing someone with a gun. I didn't wait for an answer. I could have been killed, I cried. But nothing happened, said my wife, and looking at my father, she added, right? Nothing happened, said my father, but he had a mysterious look on his face that led me to picture him drowning an IRA man in the brook as 12-year-old me slept soundly nearby. I wouldn't put it past him. I'd like to say, said my mother, that I had no idea this was going on. For a while there, my siblings and I called my mother Carmela after Carmela Soprano. She often, in retrospect, turns out conveniently not to have had any idea what was going on when we were younger. In reality, I suspect that, like Carmela Soprano, she could quite capably run my father's enterprises if left to her own devices. In this instance, child-inclusive counter-terrorism. She was probably pleased to have a quiet house for the weekend and thought the off chance her son might be involved in a paramilitary gunfight was a risk worth taking. Childcare standards were different in the 1980s, as people repeatedly remind me. There was no helicopter parenting back then, unless my father was planning to call in a helicopter gunship for backup. But no, apparently the Ranger Wing didn't have access to a helicopter gunship at this time. I asked.